Welcome to Wisdom Unveiled. Today, we're embarking on the second part of our 12-part exploration into, well, the towering figure of Khajeh Nasir al-Din Tusi, a name that really resonates, within Islamic intellectual history.
Indeed. And while many might primarily know him for his contributions to theology,
Which are, let's be clear, undeniably significant.
absolutely. But what's truly fascinating, I think, is the profound depth of his philosophical thought. His approach to understanding knowledge, especially through this lens of dialogue, it offers insights that feel remarkably relevant even now.
So this is kind of our focused journey, then, into Tusi's multifaceted intellect. We're aiming to go beyond just that common understanding of him as, well, solely a theologian.
Precisely. While his theological work is absolutely foundational, the sheer breadth and, frankly, the sophistication of his philosophical work really deserves greater attention. For this deep dive, we've been looking at discussions from the Iranian program Marifat, featuring Dr. Ebrahim Dinani and Dr. Esmail Mansouri Larijani. They offer some really compelling insights into Tusi's genius.
Okay, our mission then really is to uncover the full spectrum of Tusi's intellectual landscape, putting, a particular emphasis on his philosophy and the pivotal role that dialogue played in how he pursued knowledge.
Yeah, and just a quick note for you, our listener. This exploration, it's based on translations of conversations with Iranian philosophers. So inevitably, some nuances might get subtly altered or perhaps not fully captured in translation. We do apologize in advance for any inadvertent discrepancies that might pop up.
Understood. That's always a challenge with translation. So let's begin by establishing, who exactly was Khajeh Nasir al-Din Tusi?
Right. So Khajeh Nasir al-Din Tusi, he was born in Tus, lived for a significant 57 years, and passed away in Kazmin in 672 AH. That's the Islamic calendar. And interestingly, his final resting place is actually near the revered imams, Imam Kazim and Imam Javad.
Wow. That proximity to such holy figures, it certainly underscores the depth of his faith. But what immediately strikes me is just the sheer scope of his intellectual mastery. He wasn't just focused on one thing, was he?
Absolutely not. Tusi possessed a mind that just seemed to encompass this extraordinary range of fields. I mean, he was a master not only of theology, but also philosophy, logic, ethics, mysticism, mathematics, astronomy, even medicine. It's almost breathtaking, really, to consider such comprehensive expertise in one person.
It truly is. And his theological work, particularly Tajrid al-I'tiqad, which is often translated as liberation of belief, focusing on the core tenets of Islamic creed, that work alone has left such an indelible mark.
Oh, without question. For over 7 centuries, Tajrid has served as this central, highly influential text in theological discourse. It sparked countless commentaries from scholars across both Sunni and Shia traditions. Even those who held, quite different views recognized the intellectual power and the precision of his arguments in that text.
And now, offering a kind of fresh lens on this remarkable figure is Dr. Ebrahim Dinani's recent book, Khajeh Nasir al-Din Tusi, Philosopher of Dialogue. That title itself immediately suggests something unique about his intellectual life.
It really does. It specifically highlights Tusi's profound engagement with dialogue, seeing it as a fundamental element of his philosophical method. It wasn't just like a tool he sometimes used. It was deeply intertwined with how he approached philosophical inquiry itself.
Which brings us back to that crucial point. While his theological contributions are widely acknowledged, it seems his philosophical depth has, maybe, often been relatively overlooked. His work in liberation of belief is monumental, no doubt, but we need to appreciate the equal, maybe even greater, significance of his philosophical work.
Precisely. While he certainly engaged deeply with theological questions, his intellectual reach, it just extended so far beyond those boundaries. You just need to consider, for instance, his groundbreaking work in astronomy.
Right, the Moraga Observatory, a real testament to his scientific acumen.
Exactly. That incredibly ambitious scientific undertaking is just one really vivid illustration of the extraordinary breadth of his knowledge and the impact his intellectual pursuits had well beyond just theology.
So why then this relative neglect of his philosophical side? Were there specific historical factors may be contributing to this?
It's a bit complex, definitely. His reception did vary, particularly among some Sunni scholars. His involvement in the tumultuous events surrounding the fall of the Abbasid Caliphate are a really pivotal moment in Islamic history that seems to have cast a certain shadow, perhaps, on how some viewed his legacy later on.
That makes sense. Political events, they often have these long-lasting repercussions on intellectual reputations, don't they?
Indeed. And even within Shia scholarship, while his theological contributions are highly celebrated, his, really pioneering work in logic and broader philosophical inquiry hasn't always historically received quite the same level of focused attention.
But fortunately, as Dr. Dinani and Dr. Larijani emphasize, more recent scholarship is actively working to sort of redress that imbalance, to give us a more complete picture of his intellectual output. And the sources are quite clear. He was a deeply committed Shia scholar.
Undeniably. And when we think about the broader trajectory of Islamic intellectual history, the Shia tradition, you could argue, owes a significant intellectual debt to Tusi.
In what specific ways? How did he influence that?
Well, it's been convincingly argued that without his dedicated efforts, the vibrant presence of philosophy within Shia thought might not have been sustained with quite the same strength and continuity. He essentially laid some crucial groundwork for later philosophical giants.
So you're suggesting he was like a vital link in that chain of philosophical thought?
Absolutely. He effectively paved the way for these profoundly influential figures like Mullah Sadra, whose own, groundbreaking philosophical system built upon many of the foundations that Tusi had established and really solidified.
This really underscores his pivotal role then. So Tusi emerges as this key figure who kind of breathed new life into deep philosophical thinking within the Islamic world, particularly after the significant challenges posed by Ghazali's Tahafut al-Falasifa, the incoherence of the philosophers, which critiqued core tenets of Aristotelian-influenced philosophy pretty heavily.
Precisely. And this point highlights a really crucial divergence, actually, in the trajectory of intellectual history across the Islamic world. In many Sunni-majority regions, while philosophy initially flourished, it gradually faced increasing challenges and eventually, in later centuries, saw a significant decline. Western philosophical traditions largely took precedence there, but in Iran, philosophy not only survived but continued to flourish, and a substantial part of that continuity can be directly attributed to the enduring impact of Tusi's work and his commitment to rational inquiry.
It's interesting to consider the common association, of Ibn Rushd or Averroes with the defense of philosophy against Ghazali. His Tahafut al-Tafut is a very well-known refutation. But the perspectives we're drawing on here suggest maybe a more nuanced understanding of Tusi's role.
Yes, that's a vital distinction. While Ibn Rushd certainly mounted a powerful defense of philosophy against Ghazali, his work also contained significant critiques of Ibn Sina's philosophical system, and it remained pretty firmly rooted within a specific Aristotelian framework. Tusi, on the other hand, he's presented as a more broadly encompassing and perhaps less dogmatic champion of philosophical reasoning across the wider spectrum of Islamic intellectual traditions. He really engaged with a broader range of philosophical ideas and criticisms.
Which brings us back full circle almost to the title of Dr. Dinani's book, Philosopher of Dialogue. It seems this isn't just a descriptive label. It's actually key to understanding his entire philosophical approach.
Precisely. It gets right to the very heart of how Tusi engaged with philosophical questions and how he interacted with other thinkers. Dialogue wasn't just like a peripheral activity for him. It was absolutely central to his method.
So if dialogue is his method, how did that actually manifest in his work? How did it differ, say, from just plain debate?
That's a crucial distinction. The emphasis here is on dialogue, or Goftogu in Persian, which at its core is really about seeking mutual understanding. This differs quite significantly from Jadal, often translated as debate, which carries that connotation of aiming to win an argument, or Monazara, which refers to polemics and can often take a much more adversarial tone. Tusi, as this philosopher deeply committed to dialogue, primarily engaged in respectful, reasoned exchange. It was firmly grounded in philosophical principles and, maybe most importantly, characterized by fairness and a genuine pursuit of truth.
Can you give us some concrete examples from his extensive body of work, maybe his commentary on Ibn Sina's Al-Isharat wal-Tanbihat?
That's an excellent example, yeah. His commentary on Ibn Sina's remarks and admonitions, it goes far beyond simply explaining or summarizing Ibn Sina's original text. While he engages deeply with Ibn Sina's ideas, Tusi also subtly addresses and often offers reasoned refutations of the criticisms that Fakhr al-Din al-Razi, a prominent earlier scholar, had leveled against Ibn Sina. Okay. So it's a dialogue with both Ibn Sina and, indirectly, with his critics. Like a freeway conversation, almost.
Precisely. But what's particularly revealing is Tusi's intellectual style. His approach is notably more measured, more nuanced, and certainly less overtly combative than al-Razi's often was. He really prioritizes clarity and reasoned argument over forceful rebuttal.
Interesting. What about his work titled Musara at al-Musaria? The translation, Wrestling with Wrestling. That sounds quite confrontational, doesn't it?
It does sound that way, yeah. Musara al-Musaria was his direct response to Abd al-Karim al-Shahrastani's book Musara al-Falasifa, The Wrestling of the Philosophers. Shahrastani, representing a particular theological viewpoint, offered a pretty critical perspective on philosophy.
Okay, so Shahrastani was, in essence, grappling with the ideas of the philosophers himself. Exactly. And coming from an Ash'ari theological background, he often viewed philosophical inquiry with, let's say, a degree of skepticism. His wrestling with philosophy was quite critical, highlighting what he saw as its shortcomings. Tusi's wrestling, in contrast, it's characterized by this reasoned and eloquent engagement. His aim was clearly to clarify and defend philosophical ideas against Shahrastani's criticisms, not simply to attack the person or their theological stance. It's a fundamentally different kind of intellectual engagement, even with that title.
And beyond his formal treatises and commentaries, he also engaged in dialogue through correspondence, didn't he? Exchanging letters with figures like Nasir al-Din al-Qazwini and the Sufi master Sajjaddin al-Qanawi.
Yes, absolutely. His correspondence, for instance, with Nasir al-Din al-Qazwini, a scholar based way over in Damascus, and with the highly influential Sufi master Sadr al-Din al-Qanawi, who was a key successor to Ibn Arabi, that correspondence vividly demonstrates his capacity to engage respectfully and thoughtfully with this diverse spectrum of intellectual perspectives, spanning both philosophy and mysticism.
It really highlights his ability to find common ground, maybe, and engage constructively across different schools of thought. So the argument being presented here is that for Tusi, dialogue wasn't just a tool to advance philosophical understanding. In a very real sense, philosophy itself was a form of ongoing dialogue, almost kind of like the Socratic method.
That's a remarkably insightful parallel, actually. And this idea of dialogue, it extends even to the realm of our own internal thought processes.
Could you elaborate on that? How does that work?
Well, just consider philosophical reflection. Even when we're engaged in solitary contemplation, isn't that often a form of internal dialogue? A process of questioning, exploring different possibilities, maybe arguing with oneself, and arriving at conclusions through an inner exchange of ideas? It goes far beyond just the simple processing of, daily concerns.
That's a fascinating way to frame it, internal reflection as an ongoing conversation with oneself. Like thinking is dialogue.
Precisely. The discussions we've drawn from even mention a beautiful piece of Persian poetry that speaks of an inner voice revealing profound truths. This really captures the essence of that idea, internal dialogue, as the very wellspring from which genuine philosophical inquiry originates and, flows.
So the core takeaway here seems to be that Tusi's entire body of work is just imbued with this spirit of dialogue.
Yes. It's characterized by a really notable absence of rigid dogmatism or fanaticism and a deep-seated commitment to reasoned discussion as the primary means of intellectual progress.
Now let's shift a bit and consider the broader historical context Tusi was living and working in. He witnessed the absolutely devastating aftermath of the Mongol invasions, a period of immense upheaval and loss.
Indeed. Those were incredibly challenging times, marked by widespread destruction and profound social and political instability. His dedication to intellectual pursuits in that kind of environment is all the more remarkable. He even penned a poignant verse reflecting this reality, comparing himself to a precious gem surrounded by calamity.
Calamity is the ring, and I am the gem. Wow, that single line powerfully conveys this sense of being this beacon of intellect in a time of immense crisis. It truly underscores the extraordinary circumstances he had to navigate. And yet, Tusi consciously chose this path of intellectual inquiry, actively promoting rationality and learning right in the midst of chaos.
It seems he held this deep conviction that ultimately human flourishing, maybe even survival, depended on cultivating rational thought. He likely saw unchecked power, devoid of reason, as this incredibly destructive force, think Genghis Khan or maybe even the pharaohs of old.
And what's truly remarkable is how he managed to leverage his considerable intellect and, frankly, his influence with the Mongol rulers, particularly with Hulagu Khan.
Yes, this is a particularly significant aspect of his life and work. Rather than just withdrawing from the world, he skillfully navigated that political landscape to actively foster intellectual growth. He secured the administration of the Ministry of Endowments, the Awqaf, and strategically used those resources to establish the Maraga Observatory, which quickly became this preeminent center of scientific learning.
A world-class institution, really, attracting leading scholars from all across the known world at the time. And the sheer scale of the library he assembled there.
The library at Mariga, yeah, according to historical accounts, it housed an absolutely astonishing number of manuscripts, something like 400,000 volumes. Just imagine the wealth of knowledge contained within those walls during that era.
It's almost unimaginable, isn't it? It truly highlights his strategic brilliance and his unwavering commitment to intellectual advancement, even when facing such immense adversity.
Absolutely. He effectively transformed the destructive potential of the Mongol conquests into an opportunity for intellectual flourishing. In a sense, turning the instruments of war towards the pursuit of knowledge. It's quite a turnaround.
And the legacy of the Moraga Observatory, it endures. Even modern astronomers acknowledge its foundational contributions to the field.
Oh, without a doubt. Its work laid essential groundwork for later astronomical discoveries. And connecting this back to his philosophical impact, it's clear that Tusi's contributions weren't purely theoretical. He actively worked to create the institutional and intellectual conditions necessary for future advancements, particularly for someone like Mullah Sadra, whose philosophical system would later profoundly shape the intellectual landscape of the Safavid period, really solidifying the place of rationalist thought within Shia Islam.
Okay, let's delve a bit deeper now into the specific principles that guided Tusi's approach to dialogue, drawing from Dr. Dinani's insightful analysis of his method and, maybe, his etiquette. What's particularly striking is how deeply grounded his approach is in Quranic teachings, specifically that verse. Invite to the way of your Lord with wisdom and good instruction, and argue with them in a way that is best.
Right, and it's crucial to understand that Tusi's strong Shia faith deeply informed his interpretation and application of this verse. So let's break down the key components, as Tusi and Dr. Dinani, interpreting him, understood them. First, with wisdom, hikmah. What does that really entail in this context?
Okay, hikmah. It seems to signify precision, soundness of reasoning, rational and demonstrative speech. Like really knowing your stuff, having a profound and thorough grasp of the subject matter. The underlying root of the word itself suggests firmness, establishment, implying intellectual rigor and a solid foundation.
Precisely. Hikmah here signifies a deep and rigorous understanding. Got it. Next, with good instruction or advice, mawiza hasana, what does that aspect emphasize?
This element seems to focus more on how you engage. Gently, constructively, avoiding harshness or irrelevant arguments. It stresses good conduct, meeting people where they are intellectually, and offering guidance in a way that's accessible and persuasive, rather than just confrontational. Kindness, essentially.
Gentle persuasion. Okay. And finally, argue with them in a way that is best. Jadilam bilati hiya asan. What are the key characteristics of this mode of argumentation?
This sounds like it calls for a noble and fair form of debate, completely distinct from biased polemics where the main goal is just to score points or, assert dominance. It emphasizes constructive argument focused on advancing understanding and seeking truth, not just refuting an opponent. And a central part of this approach is a commitment to intellectual freedom, a rejection of rigid dogmatic prejudice.
Exactly. He championed a willingness to re-examine one's own assumptions, to engage thoughtfully with diverse perspectives, always with the ultimate goal being the pursuit of wisdom itself. He believed, it seems, that a truly wise individual guides those seeking knowledge towards wisdom in a clear, straightforward manner. No obfuscation.
The discussions also highlighted other important aspects of his dialogical approach, didn't they? Characteristics we might explore in more detail in future discussions, perhaps.
Yes, several key principles emerged. Things like his notable lack of fanaticism or prejudice, his emphasis on eloquence balaga, which he saw as essential for effectively conveying wisdom, a deep respect for ethical considerations in any intellectual exchange, and a remarkable degree of receptivity and open-mindedness. It was likened to a physician adapting their approach to the specific needs of the patient or the person he was talking to.
And his commitment to disciplinary rigor was also highlighted, wasn't it? Theology should be approached as theology, philosophy as philosophy, and mysticism within its own framework, maintaining the integrity of each field, basically. This was contrasted with what was termed a disorganized marketplace.
Yes, exactly. A concern that interdisciplinary work, if it's not approached with sufficient depth and expertise in each contributing field, can easily become superficial. It can lack true intellectual rigor, kind of like a confused mixture lacking any distinct flavors or substance.
Right. So Tusi wasn't advocating for just blurring all the boundaries, but rather for rigorous inquiry within each distinct domain of knowledge.
Precisely. He engaged as a theologian using the principles of theology, as a philosopher with the tools of philosophy. It was all about maintaining intellectual integrity within each specific field of study.
So, As we sort of conclude this initial deep dive into the intellectual world of Khajeh Nasir al-Tusi, we've gained some real insights, I think, into his life, the extraordinary breadth of his knowledge, and the absolutely foundational importance of dialogue in his philosophical methodology.
Yes. And by understanding his approach to dialogue, characterized by reason, respect, and this deep commitment to knowledge, we actually gain valuable tools. Tools that can still inform and enrich our own complex discussions and intellectual engagements today.
It certainly provides a lot of food for thought. So, here's maybe a final question for you, our listener, to mull over. How might consciously embracing Khajeh Nasir al-Tusi's principles, those principles of reasoned, respectful, and deeply informed dialogue, how might that contribute to more productive and insightful conversations in your own life, in your own world?
A question definitely worth considering.
Indeed. And remember, this is just the first step in our 12-part journey into the wisdom of Tusi. We really look forward to our next exploration, where we'll delve even further into his profound thought and how he applied these principles in specific areas of his vast intellectual landscape.